I'm Cindy Lauper with fellow Cosentyx advocate, Chef Michelle Bernstein.
We'll share our experiences with plaque psoriasis, with psoriatic arthritis, and Dr. Panika will talk about the possible connection.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis 300 milligram dose and adults with active psoriatic arthritis 150 milligram dose. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur.
Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com/Cindy.
16 years from today, Greg Gerstner will finally land the perfect cannonball. Epic splash. Unsuspecting friends. A work of art only possible because Greg is already meeting all these same people at AARP volunteer and community events that keep him active and involved and help make sure his happiness lives as long as he does. That's why the younger you are, the more you need AARP. Learn more at aarp.org/local.
They're just unexpected roots, and I'm interested in them, but I don't know how to express them, and I don't know what feels right and what feels right to claim, because whatever I do, I feel like an imposter. Like whether it's my Jewish side, because I know that I'm not 100% Jewish, whether it's, the Latin American side, because I know, okay, so my mom is from Latin America and I grew up visiting her country, and I have cousins that still live in her country and they have children. So I have all this family and I do speak the language and I do eat the foods and all that cultural stuff, but it's still not exactly the same. It's a subset of culture. And then this African American piece that I didn't know anything about, and I don't know what I have rights to, especially since I wasn't created on purpose.
Welcome to DNA Surprises, a podcast that delves into the world of unexpected DNA discoveries. I'm your host, Alexis Auersalt. In July 2021, my life took a surprising turn when I found out that I'm an NPE, a person who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. Join me as we explore the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. Get ready to unravel the astonishing journeys that begin with a simple DNA test. This is DNA Surprises. Who would I have been if I'd known the truth about my identity? This is a question people in the DNA Surprise community often ask themselves. Where would I have lived? What choices would I have made? What about my life would be different from how it is today? In the season 11 finale of DNA Surprises, Lori shares how much of her childhood and who she is today was shaped by her parents' efforts to keep her donor conception and the truth about her ethnicity a secret. Now, I'm going to break the fourth wall here for a moment. I've spoken to dozens of guests in the 3 years that I've been making this show, but few who have made discoveries so similar to my own. Lori also learned through DNA testing that her genetic parent is Black. In this episode, she articulates how challenging it can be to navigate a major change in ethnicity in an authentic way, and why she identifies as mixed as opposed to Black or African American. Race, ethnicity, and culture are complex topics that require so much nuance, and they can be difficult to talk about. My own racial and cultural identity is something that I continue to struggle with in the aftermath of my DNA surprise, so speaking to her was incredibly validating. I'm so grateful for our conversation. Thank you for sharing your story, Lori.
Hey, I'm Lori, and I'm 46, and I grew up in New York. So I found out two things. First of all, I found out that I am not 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. I am 50% African American. And secondly, I found out that I'm donor conceived. It probably makes sense to really start at the very beginning because I think it puts into context the decisions my parents made and also how I grew up. I know you had a racial DNA surprise as well. And so one of the big questions that people get when they hear about it, they're like, what do you mean you didn't know? Like, are you dumb? So I think the backstory is
Oh,
sort of
yes.
important for giving that
Yeah.
context because, like, no, I'm not dumb, but I do feel dumb. I was born in the late 1970s and donor conception wasn't really a thing. My parents apparently struggled with infertility. They got married 4 years before I was born. And then about 3 years after they got married, they had a baby boy who did not make it. So he died a couple of days after he was born. And then I was born about 15 months after that. So looking at those timelines, it's not a situation where I would suspect that there were fertility issues. My parents weren't particularly old. They were in their late 20s when I was born, but I didn't find out about any of that stuff until the DNA surprise. So I grew up as the oldest of two kids. I'm 4 years older, just about, than my younger brother. And my mom is from Latin America, but she is Ashkenazi Jewish. Her parents came from Europe to escape World War II, and my dad grew up in Brooklyn. So I grew up in this very Ashkenazi Jewish family, but on my mom's side, also very much colored by her growing up in Latin America. My mom's family speaks Spanish, and so we grew up eating both Latin foods and Jewish foods. And that's important to the story because it was kind of part of that story that I constructed for myself because I looked a little different than everyone else in my family. And it was pretty obvious that I looked different to other people. From the time I was growing up, I would get a lot of those questions like, where are you from? And I would, play around, be like, I'm from New York or whatever. But really the answer that I would give is like, oh, my mom is from Latin America. So a lot of people would just accept that at face value because they didn't really realize that my mother's family was all from Eastern Europe. And the whole thing didn't 100% makes sense, but I'm ethnically ambiguous enough that at least to some people, curly hair, a little bit darker skin, it kind of all made sense,
Yeah.
enough.
So was that right. And I'm obviously very much relating to a lot of the things that you're saying right now. When you would tell people that my mom is from South America, Latin America, was that just so that they would leave you alone, stop asking? Or did you also internalize that story that is why you look different from your family?
It was a combination of both because there wasn't any real reason why that would be the case. Because I knew both of my grandparents. I knew they were both born in Eastern Europe. I knew my mom and her sisters, and Jewish people from Eastern Europe don't look exactly like Eastern European non-Jewish people. They might be a little bit darker. They'll have oftentimes curlier hair and so forth. But people were specifically assuming that I was African American or that I was mixed or something like that. So it was really intended to be an explanation. So I definitely made sure that my Spanish was good because I felt like it kind of added authenticity to that story. And I also grew up in a neighborhood where everyone was pretty much Italian or Irish. So I already was an outsider being Jewish in that neighborhood. And then looking African American, I was an outsider in the Jewish community because people would always be confused by me. And then also in the area where I grew up, it was 100% white people.
Did you at any point did you think that you looked African American?
I didn't really know. I just knew I looked different, right? And I'd ask my parents about it and they would just deflect. And then it really became more noticeable to me. People would say the N-word to me in school and I'd be like, why are they doing this? This is so confusing. But I really noticed it when I went to college more because I got there and I thought the reason was maybe because there just weren't that many Jewish people where I grew up and I'd go to college and I'd fit in. And what I ended up doing is all my friends were Hispanic for the most part. And then people would again just assume that I was African American. And when I said I was from Latin America, a lot of Hispanic people are multiracial. So then that just like put an end to all the questioning. And then because I spoke Spanish, because my mom actually was from Latin America, it provided this off ramp. So I didn't really have to do a lot of exploring or probing. Because I think, when people ask, like, how didn't you know? It's because your parents kind of tell you where you're from and like who your family is and who you are. So you just like you don't distrust your parents in that sense, especially when like you just believe them. And I think you're programmed to believe them. My parents definitely they would do certain things. Like I was always very self-conscious about it. When I was 4, my mom started taking me to this hair salon in Queens, and like they would prop me up on all these phone books and they would relax my hair with these live relaxers, and it was our secret. And it was painful. Like they burned my head and I would sit there and I'd pretend not to notice it because I wanted my hair to be as straight as possible. And I wasn't allowed to tell anybody about this. It was our secret. And like in the summers, my brother was very fair and he fit perfectly into the family. I wasn't supposed to go swimming until the sun was going down because like they didn't want me to get too dark. So there were definitely things that my mom in particular was doing. I grew up in the 80s, by the way. So like the curly hair thing, like I wanted curly hair. And I was like, can I have a perm?
Yeah, perms
Like, no, you can't have
yeah.
a perm. Like it was all about trying to like portray this appearance. And like, so I knew that these things were weird and it bothered me because it made me feel very insecure. Like I always felt like there was something wrong with me. Like I was too dark and I tanned too much and my hair wasn't nice and I had bad hair. And I spent all of like basically until I was 25 even later, trying to deal with that. But I didn't understand it and I didn't understand the context of it.
Did you ever ask your mom, like, why? Why can't I go swimming when my brother can go
Well, she's
swimming?
like, you get too dark. And she would always, it was because of the tan.
And so she would actually say, I don't want you to get too tan. And for people that are listening, Lori is light-skinned, pretty, like, relatively fair, right? I mean, it's
medium,
hard to tell
I guess, because the lighting is really bad in here.
Yeah,
it's really bad. So it's more of a medium complexion, I would say.
Yes.
Like whenever I buy cosmetics, it's usually like in like the medium-ish range, medium to tan, something like that.
Same. Yeah. Okay, same here. But during the summertime, I can get pretty dark. And so I imagine similar for you. Okay.
Yeah, same. So I could get super dark. And so, so she was trying to keep me in this sort of more medium kind of complexion, which is probably a little bit darker than your average, like Southern European, but not like so dark that you'd be like, where, this makes absolutely no sense. So wanted to keep me light enough where there was some sort of plausible deniability. My brother didn't. He was like really white.
Okay. So your brother did not look like you either.
No. In addition to the tanning thing, my mom had me have my nose thinned out when I was 18.
And was that something that you wanted to do, or was it mostly from her?
I was always told that there was something with my nose. And so it was like a lot of pressure. But then when I went back and like looked at the pictures, and also like when my ex-husband like saw the pictures of me as a kid, he was like, you really looked blacker with your nose like wider, like more of an African American feature. And I think like in retrospect, like even if it wasn't like my parents like consciously trying to do that, I think like it was subconscious, I was also really tall. That was the other thing that was super off about me. My mom is like 4'10" on a good day, claims to be 5 foot, and my dad is about 5'3", and my brother grew up to be about 5'4", 5'3", 5'4", and I'm closer to 5'7". And also my mom wore a size 5 shoe and I wore a size 8 shoe, and they would call me Bigfoot. Like they would just make fun of me for being so big. So I felt like this huge giant in the middle of this really short family. Like on my mom's side, I'm literally the tallest person, male or female, of all my cousins, like everybody.
Wow.
So everyone's really short. And then on my dad's side, I have one tall uncle. So I would latch onto that. I'd be like, well, that's probably why I'm tall. Because like, my uncle is tall,
The stories we tell.
Yeah. So I was like always trying to find pieces that would fit. And I would Google like Jewish people who looked black to try to figure it out. And it would always be like people like Lenny Kravitz or Lisa Bonet who were actually half black. Because like what would happen was like in college and in law school and in grad school, I would always be added automatically to the Black Students Associations because people would just assume that I was like biracial or mixed or something like that. And at the time, my hair was relaxed, which I think added to the perception, which is the opposite, I think, of what my parents intended.
How did it affect you? How did you feel being kind of stereotyped, however accurately in hindsight, right? But being stereotyped and just automatically put into these groups and people automatically making assumptions about your race. And you really believed you were something else. How did that affect you?
It was awkward because, like, in a couple of different ways, because, like, I never wanted people to think I was trying to be something that I wasn't. And it's just like uncomfortable if people think you're something you're not. So what I did is I kind of leaned into more like the fact that my mom was from Latin America. So I'm like, I know I'll get more involved in like the Latino student associations, because I'm like, you don't have to be any race to be Latino. Like, you can be any religion. It doesn't matter. So that to me made sense. But, that also kind of leads into how it was that I eventually decided to do the DNA test. And again, it had been ongoing over the years. And like when I got divorced, my ex-husband was like, your mom had an affair. She must be a swinger because there's no way that you're completely white. Like, are you dumb? And like, I was just like, so like standing my ground. I'm like, no, like that's not my parents. And he would use that like to throw in my face. He was trying to get my kids to take DNA tests to try to figure it out. But really what ended up getting me to do it, and I actually bought a DNA test like a couple of years before I actually did it, and I lost it. It disappeared. Found out later my mom had found it and thrown it out.
Oh,
in my house.
Okay.
She had been staying over. I had bought it and I shoved it in a drawer, and she saw it and threw it out. I'm so disorganized. I thought like, I was just like, I don't know what happened to it. So I bought another one, and then that one sat for months, and I finally took it because there were a couple of things that happened where I started worrying that I was going to like get like found out for pretending to be something that I wasn't, because, there was the Rachel Dolezal thing. And like, I never ever said that I was African American, but people often assumed it. And I was always feeling like this need to correct people. And I think that could be off-putting too, because it wasn't like I had an issue. I just never wanted to be seen as pretending to be something I wasn't. And then there was a professor at a university that was Jewish that was pretending to be Puerto Rican. And then I was like, oh crap. Like, I wasn't pretending to be anything. I felt like I legitimately, like my mom was legitimately from Latin America, and like it was reasonable. But at the same time, I was like, what if people don't agree and they think because you're Jewish, you don't have a right to claim that you're from Latin America? And then I was like, well, shoot, what do I do? Because I was really freaking out. Like, what if people find out that I'm a fraud and then I end up losing everything? And I started like having this whole like freak out. So I finally decided to send in the test, and I didn't know what I was going to find. And I was like, it'll put it to rest one way or the other.
It was like a fear. And would you say that this was a big part of your life and your identity? Was this ambiguousness and people questioning you? Did you feel like that was a big part of who you were?
Absolutely, it was, because it was happening constantly. Because I think, a lot of different settings, people just want to know how to characterize people. So, like in school, there were different affinity groups, and also in companies. This was like when I started working in the professional world, it was like a couple years before 2008, but like when Obama became president, there was a lot more focus growing over the years on diversity and things like that. Like, they wanted to know like how to characterize you. And so like it started to become more and more important to know how to characterize myself, because like whenever, like if I said like, oh no, I'm just an Eastern European Jew, like people would make the mailman jokes and the milkman jokes. And it was just like it sounded so ridiculous that it wasn't an acceptable response, because nobody believed it, like literally nobody. And so the only response people believed was, oh, I'm Hispanic, which was true, but it was also like, again, it wasn't like I looked that way because my mom was from Latin America. It was just a coincidence.
Right. You didn't have Spanish or indigenous. There are African roots, but you didn't think that you had them.
Right,
So
I didn't think I
you
had
couldn't pull
them.
on that.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. And also like what ended up kind of coming to a head too. So it was like, so that professor who is like Jewish pretending to be Puerto Rican. And then around the same time, I got a big promotion and people were upset that the African American Affinity Group didn't say anything about me getting promoted because I would have been the first like Black female to have been internally promoted. And then somebody called me. So one of the people, she was one of the few Black female partners at my firm, called me and she was talking about how excited she was for another Black woman to get promoted. And it was so awkward because I was trying to figure out the right way to like interrupt and tell her I'm actually not Black. And it was so awkward.
Oh, wow.
And so it was like that
Oh, my
combination of
gosh.
things that had me mail in the test. So like I ended up having to like send her a note, like, like I really appreciate it, but I'm not actually Black. Like, so like that's the thing. And it was just so awkward because it didn't even occur to people.
Wow.
And I think also people were offended because they were just like, does she just like not like herself or what? And then there's also like a tension between like the Afro-Latino community and the African American community because not all Latinos embrace their African heritage. There's some of that too.
Right.
And like I was sort of tripping into all of these different things inadvertently. White people just would assume I was Black or, something. And then Black people always saw like the African American heritage in me,
Sure. Okay. So take me to getting your results and opening them up.
So I got my results. So I sent in my test and it was like part of like the Christmas flood of tests, that went in. So I mailed it out like, I don't know, sometime after the new year. Like pretty early on, a couple of years ago, I guess this was about 4 years ago. And I was kind of stalking them. Like I put them in the mailbox. Like my parents live nearby. So I put them in like the mailbox, like when I knew my mom wasn't around. And then I literally watched the mailman take it out of my mailbox because I was worried that like my mom was going to see it. Because my cousins on my dad's side had done DNA testing and they were talking about it. And I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. And then in the car on the way home, this was about like maybe 6 or 7 years ago, like my mom like flipped. She was like, don't you dare, like promise me you're not going to do DNA testing. And like obviously that was super suspicious. So at that point I was like beginning to suspect that perhaps that's why my DNA test disappeared. And I was starting to put two and two together. So finally, even though I didn't know what I was going to find, like by the time I sent my test, I had a pretty good idea that there must be, like my parents were hiding something. I didn't know what. I was like, maybe it was something like my grandmother did, although that didn't make any sense based on like my mother's appearance. But like, it's really scary to take the step to find out. Like, it's one thing if you innocently send off a test and you don't really know what you're going to find. But I think it's another when you know that there's like probably a greater than 50% chance that something is going to be uncovered. I didn't know what. I had no idea. Because like also my mom is very conservative. So I didn't think she'd had an affair. I was so confused. Like I couldn't figure out an explanation. Like she was very into like that purity culture. I didn't know what to expect. So I sent it in. And then the day before the test results came back, I had eaten like a bad burrito. So I was up all night and like super sick with awful food poisoning. It was like miserable. So my mom stayed over because I was dehydrated. I had all my kids at home. Like it was just a nightmare. At 7:30 in the morning, I woke up and it was March 7th. I check my email and I see that my results from Ancestry came in. And I was like, oh. So like she was there and then I was like, oh, can I have some tea? So I sent her down to make me tea. And I go quickly look on my phone and I ignore all the warnings and I look. And right away, like you can see like the pie chart or whatever. It came out to exactly 50% Ashkenazi Jewish, which is what I expected. Ashkenazi Jewish, but not 50%. And then there were a whole bunch of different other things. The second largest ethnicity was like Nigeria. And then it was just like a whole list of African countries. And when I did the math, it came out to about 40% African countries and 10% European countries. I haven't taken science since college, but I knew enough to know that in order to have 40% African DNA, that means that like one of my parents has to have 80% African DNA, and neither one of my parents have 80% African DNA. And I knew nothing about Ancestry at that point, but I did see that I could click to see matches. And there's a warning there, and I was like, ignore all that crap. And I went and I clicked it, And I saw that my highest match was my mother's sister. I did some Googling and it was pretty clear that she was 100% like my first aunt. And then my second highest match was, I still remember, 632 centimorgans, and he was an African-American man from the Bronx. And I looked through my list, and there are tons of African-American people that are connected to me genetically. So I thought to myself, I'm like, well, that's weird. My DNA must have mixed with somebody else's, like, and I'm like, no, that can't
is the
be.
next logical thing, right?
So I was like, this is super confusing. And I'm like, because there's no way, because neither one of my parents are African. And it was too high for it. Clearly, it wasn't my mother. So that threw out like the theory, like the Latin American theory. Like that made no sense. And then I'm thinking about it. I'm like, wait. So if I match with my mom's sister, that means my mom must also be 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. And then I was like, oh my God. So I immediately went on Amazon and ordered a 23andMe kit. And I waited for that to come. And 23andMe is a little easier to read, I think, because they break it down by continent a little bit more clearly. And that came a couple of weeks later. And it came out again to the same 41% African DNA and 10% European DNA. Similar kind of list of countries, slight differences, but basically the same. And I didn't really have many matches on 23andMe. I had a lot of matches on Ancestry. I was mad.
Yeah, I was going to say, what was your first reaction? It was anger?
Oh my God. I was so mad. And I didn't say anything to my mom. I'm like, because she'll kill herself or something, because she's very emotionally volatile. And she threatened me that she would if I took a DNA test years ago.
Oh, wow.
And she's just like that. I didn't know if she was going to do it or not, but I didn't want responsibility for that. But I was so mad. So at the same time, I was like, I can't tell anyone. So this is awkward. But I wanted to know what was happening. And I was trying to come up with all these different theories. And I was like, well, it's possible she was depressed after she lost her baby and had an affair. It didn't sound like her, but maybe. Because again, my DNA matches were in the Bronx. And at the time, my parents lived in New York City. So I'm like, that's possible. They didn't live in the Bronx at the time, although my mom did live in the Bronx at one point. They did not live in the Bronx at that point, but you never know. Maybe they was in Manhattan because she worked in Manhattan, and maybe something happened. Maybe she was sexually assaulted. That's possible. I didn't have any sibling matches. Donor conception didn't really occur to me because I was like, oh, why would they give an African-American sperm donor to a white couple?
Right. Usually they try to match the ethnicity of the parents. And you didn't have 50 siblings turn
right.
up,
And that's what I was expecting, which now I realize for someone who was born in the 1970s, it's not unusual necessarily, because I was born before frozen sperm was really a thing. They were just experimenting with that at the time, but I didn't know that. So I was pretty mad. I didn't know what to do with the information. I'm like, I can't tell anyone. But I did end up telling my 16-year-old, which was probably not the smartest, but we were driving around and I was super upset. And she could tell immediately that something was wrong. And she kept trying to ask me. And then I finally just handed her and she realized right away, what was wrong. And I called my brother. We were trying to figure it out together. This is so weird. So I got him to agree to take a DNA test. Because in my head, I'm like, well, maybe he's half African American too, even though it would have to be a genetic miracle for him. I mean, I guess anything is possible.
Sure. Yeah. You never know the way DNA works. Okay. So he takes his test.
Yeah. And he got his results a while later. It took him a while to send it. But in the meantime, I joined the Facebook pages, and then I ended up pretty quickly getting involved with a DNA angel. It was an obsession, but I don't know anything about actual genetic research, and I'm really busy, and I didn't have time to learn about it, and I wanted quicker results than I could possibly muster in my time because I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never been interested in genealogy ever. But I did a lot of homework on it, and then within a couple of weeks, I connected with a DNA search angel, and they did a lot of work, and there was a dead end that they hit because, spoiler alert, it turns out that my biological father was also an MPA.
Oh, wow.
There was just some triangulation. So we knew last names because we figured out pretty quickly, like just based on the number of centimorgans with my closest match, like we knew it was a close relative. So it turned out that ended up being a half uncle. There was one person that we were able to narrow it down to because it was a family of, I think, 6 children. I think one died like way younger than would have been able to donate. 2 were girls. This guy was not my father. Maybe there were 3 girls. I don't remember. And then there was this one brother who was not a young medical student or anything like that. But at that point, I didn't know about the donation part. But I was trying to figure it out. But anyway, he was around the same age as my parents, born around 1949, 1950. So it fit. And then we're like, this is who it might be. Also, his age triangulated with the NPE piece because we were able to trace his paternal line. And we found some documents that showed that his mother was married to the closest male ancestor on that line. Somebody that I was connected to biologically happened to have been a genealogist in that family, so started working with the NPE search angels to help me, as like a distant cousin. So putting it all together, we had a pretty good idea that this guy was the father because we had found records that his mother had previously been married. She had had twins that had died in infancy, and then she had had a son, and then there was no record of what happened to her first husband, but then there's a later record of her remarrying, and it all kind of lined up. They were in the Bronx. It just kind of all lined up, but we weren't sure, but had a pretty good idea.
Okay. So for people who maybe aren't as familiar with the genealogical piece and all the mapping, the half uncle that you matched with, did he know that he had a brother out there who was your father? Or was he raised with your genetic parent? I guess I should say. How do you refer to him?
Yeah, I guess.
Your genetic parent.
Yeah.
So your half uncle knew your genetic parent.
He did. He did not, so then I kind of reached out to him on Ancestry. So I kind of was poking around and then I kind of asked some questions and then he was like, hold on. And I think he went to talk to his sisters because I don't know if he was aware that his older brother was from a prior marriage.
Okay, so your genetic parent was the third born child to his
mother. Of the first marriage, yes.
Of the first marriage. And then the older 2 died, he was born, and then she remarried, and then the person that she remarried raised the genetic parent as their own child's. Okay.
Right.
And then everyone else was younger than him, so they wouldn't have known necessarily.
Exactly. And this was like late 40s, early 50s. And, people were kind of cagey about all this stuff. So I don't know what was known and what wasn't known. It doesn't seem like it was something that was widely talked about. So, I found all of this out, but I still had no understanding of how it all came to be. At the same time, I was still researching all of the options. So I knew, just from research, that he was not a doctor. He dropped out of high school. He had his first child at 15 years old and his second child also as a teenager. I knew from doing research that I also have a genetic half-sister that was born about a week before me. And she was in and out of prison and died in her 30s. So I knew just from all of the research that the family definitely was, I think more troubled from just family research and all of that, which didn't fit the perception that I had of who a donor would be. Because there was another branch of the family that we had zeroed in on initially on his biological father's family that had been more educated. And I thought maybe that was the side of the family that the relationship would come from. And the DNA search engines were like, no, it's not pointing that way. But in my head, I'm like, but it makes more sense if it was the other family because they were journalists and they were professors and they were really educated. And that seemed to fit more with the type, at the time, I was still going on, I was going on different theories. I'm like, that still kind of fit with my mom freaked out and had an affair theory. And also they were from Staten Island and my parents were from Staten Island.
Yeah. Because at this point you still did not know the origin story. You did not know.
No.
So you were able to identify that it's this person, but it makes sense. You're thinking, okay, what's the kind of person that my mom might have seen socially in some way?
Right. And they were from the same place. My grandparents lived in Staten Island. In my head, I had this whole story. I was like, well, my parents' baby died. I knew that my mom and my dad had a hard time when the baby died, and my parents were resentful. And I know that my mother stayed with my grandparents for a while. So I was like, well, these people are from Staten Island. Like, maybe it all makes sense. But that was not what happened, like, at all. So finally, my mom knew, like, she could sense I was hostile. And so she finally said something to me, and I just like kind of was like, well, why am I Black? Like, what happened? Like, I just kind of like finally head on, like after all those months. And I think she was just trying to figure out like why I was so hostile to her for like months. I finally asked, and then she said, we have to talk. And then she took me to her house, and they both told me that they couldn't conceive and they used a donor, and their first baby died, and they thought like maybe it was because of a donor. They didn't know. And then so they went, like they saved their money and they used a donor again a couple of months later. And my dad said that they mixed the sperm together because he was told that that would help like increase the motility of his sperm. And it was a medical student and all of that stuff. It was a doctor, and they were supposed to look like him. And so my mom's theory was maybe they like kind of decided to give her a different donor because they heard her accent. My dad used to teach in New York City public schools in like very diverse classrooms. So he noticed that I looked like the little mixed and Black babies in his class pretty early, but they just never spoke about it again. Like they just never talked about using a donor. Other? Nope. They never talked about it. Like, they just kind of pretended like it didn't happen. They used a donor again to have my brother. And I was like, hey, you really need to talk to him. Because he, like, at that point had mailed in his DNA test and hadn't gotten the results. So I told him, like, you may want to say something to him, because if you don't, I will, because he's about to find out. But yeah, they never talked about it because at the time, like they didn't even use like the same doctors. So like their doctor didn't know. Like when the baby died, like they didn't sue the doctor because there was medical malpractice because they were worried that they would find out that they used a donor.
Oh, wow. So there's some like deep shame.
Yeah, very deep shame for them. And like they were devastated that I found out. My dad was more understanding because I think he kind of knew over the years there were just certain things that would happen. And like he just knew that people were perceiving me in a certain way. And I think he understood that it was probably like not the right thing. But then on the other hand, they were both so afraid of people finding out. Like at this point, like they still don't want people to know. Like they think nobody knows. Like they don't seem to understand that like people can tell and they form their own conclusions about it.
Oh, wow. That's heavy. That they just never spoke about.
Never. My dad was really apologetic. He's like, I'm so sorry. Like, I knew your mom was doing all those things to try to cover it up with the hair and the sun and the nose and all this stuff. And he's like, and I didn't intervene because I didn't want anyone to know. So it was like they were kind of stuck in this secret, and they were both like separately engaging in their own cover up. And like they just became so invested in this secret that they didn't, I don't think, know how to get out of it. I think, carry a lot of resentment about it. I think especially because of my mom, because my mom took more physical attempts to hide it. Whereas my dad, he was like a dad. So he just like acted like he didn't know what was going on. And like, that's just what he did. And he would also try to help me. Like, for example, at one point I was getting my house appraised to refinance the mortgage. And when they did the comps, like I was there for it. But when I got the report, my house came in like well under $100,000 below what the estimate should have been. And then I looked at the addresses and I emailed them back. I'm like, why didn't you pull actual houses in my neighborhood? Like they were pulling comps from like a totally different neighborhood. And I knew right away what had happened. Like, and my dad did too. He saw it and he's like, next time I'll be there and you just pretend you don't live here.
Wow.
So he knew that they were perceiving me, whereas if I asked my mom, she'd tell me it was all in my head.
So yeah. So this topic of race, I guess my first question is, do you feel like any of your mom's actions were at all tied to racism that she may have had in like, not that she's overtly racist, or was it more just about hiding the truth?
I think it's a combination of both, to be honest. I don't think if my parents adopted or if they knew they were going to have a biracial child, I don't think my dad would have minded. There is no way my mother, like my mom wouldn't have accepted me. Like my brother told me like when this whole thing came up, when the DNA results came out, he was like, you didn't notice? He's like, everyone would always ask me why my sister was Black. And also he told me something interesting too. When he was, I guess about college age, she'd asked him at one point if he'd ever date someone like me. And then, when I met my now ex-husband, like I didn't want my parents to meet him at first. And it was mainly because my mom was so into me getting married. Like I just didn't want them to meet him initially. And my mom thought the reason was because she kept asking me, she's like, just tell me, is his mother Black? They would barely have accepted me marrying someone that wasn't Jewish, let alone someone that was a different race. That would never have been acceptable. So I always was aware that like I didn't match. And I always wondered if they could really love me because I wasn't what they wanted. So I was always a pleaser growing up. Like I always wanted to be the best. And I felt this intense pressure. And I think some of it, like now it kind of makes sense because for a couple of reasons, I think they invested a lot of money to have children. And they were also promised like that they were getting like the offspring of medical students that were going to be destined for greatness. So I think there was that expectation tied up in everything. And then also I felt like my main value in life was to please my parents. So like I got married to please my parents. Like I chose the career I did to please my parents, like mostly my mom. I think my dad didn't care as much. Like he would have been, I think, happy with me regardless of what he did. But my mom was the dominant person in my house. My dad was just there. Like he paid the bills and like he's a better grandpa than he's a good dad now, but he wasn't like a great dad for young kids. Like he was just kind of there.
I'm curious, this is a totally selfish question, about how you have navigated the fact that you were perceived as something for so long. You just said your brother was even like, hello, your sister's Black. Like, why is that? People have assumed, you talked about at work, people were disappointed that you weren't acknowledged as like the first Black woman to receive a promotion. And you kind of had to walk that back. And how have you been able to have you been able to reconcile that you had this experience where you went out into the world and people treated you like a Black woman or mixed race Black woman, and you never accepted that about yourself?
I mean, I'm curious, like, to hear your thoughts on this too, because I still feel like I have this knowledge, but I don't feel that necessarily that I have the right to, like, I haven't figured out how to slot myself because I kind of feel like I fit nowhere. Like, even before all of this, I knew I wasn't a white woman. Like, I knew that because it just never, I knew I wasn't perceived as one. So, that's why I was always trying to figure out how to explain myself because I knew I wasn't being perceived as a white woman. So I've never seen myself that way. But now, like, even just like filling out forms, I'll click 2 or more races because I feel like that's accurate from a racial perspective. But, race and culture are 2 different things, right? So I didn't grow up in the Black community. So I don't know like what's right. And it's something that I struggle with to this day. And I think part of that also is because like I still have to kind of be on the down low about it because my parents are still like completely ashamed and they also don't feel like it's my story to tell. So it's just like, again, like it's a weird scenario. And my mom still is very racially insensitive. And she was furious when she found out that my kids knew. I'm like, well, they were being asked at school. Like when I told my youngest, I told her about a year and a half ago. And like I would say she looks more Hispanic than Black. But like when I told her, she's like, well, that makes sense. Like that was her immediate initial reaction. She's a teenager. She's 14 and she's like talks to boys and like she often talks to Black boys, which sets my mom off. And I've had to pull her aside many times and she gets super mad, when she gets called out on it. But like has a lot, I think, of internalized racism. And it's really tricky because even though I think she doesn't mean to, I think some of it has been directed at me. And I think also when she does that, like it also reminds me that she would never accept me and that she didn't get what she paid for. That's how I feel. And then, adding to that too is there were certain issues too, I think, with the way I was conceived because I was conceived in the late 70s with a fresh donation. I mentioned earlier that my biological father, was, not a med student. He dropped out of high school, teenage father. I also found out later through DNA testing, I connected with 2 of his grandchildren via DNA, which really confirmed the biological connection. One of them, it's like a 1200 centimorgan connection, which is really close.
Yeah.
And another one, it's like in the, around 980 or something like that. Like it's really high. So it's unequivocal that this is my biological father. So when that was proven, I sent a person that I found on Facebook that I believe was my half-sister a DNA test, and it seems that she gave it to her daughter. So that's how we found out. And then I asked her some questions when the results came through. I'm like, it's confirmed. And I found out, I knew he had died in 1997, but I didn't know why. I found out he was a drug user and he died of AIDS. And I think the AIDS epidemic, I was born a little bit before it, but my brother was born in the 80s, early 80s. It was right at the beginning before they were really testing sperm. People had contracted HIV through sperm donation in the early 1980s. And thinking about the fact that my mom was doing that and the clinic where she went, the doctor where she went, they literally, I have no idea where they found him. No idea. And I also have connected with people whose parents use the same doctors. And there are some stories of him pulling random boyfriends of people that work there. I have no idea how he ended up being in the donor base, or how it was almost like they pulled someone off the sidewalk and was like, here, you want to make some money? Be a donor. We're in a bind and we need some sperm. I can't understand, because I was like, well, maybe there was an African-American family also trying to conceive at the same time, but then I didn't connect with them. Right. So there was nobody that I connected with genetically. And I feel like if there were another family that they were actually looking for an African-American donor at that time, I would have connected with them. So I almost feel like my parents were coming in and they had a sperm shortage and they just picked some random person from somewhere just so that they could inseminate my mom. And I don't know what they thought was going to happen.
Have you seen photos of him?
Yes, I look a lot like him, especially before my nose was fixed.
Mm-hmm.
I have half siblings, so I have a half sister, and then I think there's one half brother. And then I think there may be 1 or 2 other siblings. Like I said, one of them is exactly my age, born in the same month, same year, but she struggled with addiction and prison and she died really young. So one of the people, the nephews that I connected with was actually her son. And then the other, like I said, was the daughter of my half sister who was born when he was 15 or 16.
Do you have any relationship with those people?
Not really. I mean, I've messaged with them a few times, but it's awkward. I think number one, I still feel like I'm supposed to be keeping it a secret. Number 2, I was not supposed to be here, and I think it's upsetting to them. I don't think they're dying to meet me. And they live in New York. I do go to New York, but I've never really tried to connect with them when I'm in the city. When I'm in the city, I'm either there for work or I'm with my kids or my family. And it's just I haven't been in the headspace. And also it sounds like, we've had pretty different lives, Yeah,
it's hard to kind of go back and try to make sense of that. Especially, I think probably the donor conceived part, right? Because it's not even if it had been the other family that you thought it might have been, where maybe they
I
had
would
a
have been more
similar life.
tempted if it was more similar. But I also think knowing what I know now, from what my half sister has told me, he probably was just using the money for drug money or something like that, which also isn't a great feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, she said he was a good man, but he struggled. And I find it really upsetting to think about. There are all of these people I'm genetically connected to, and they've had really hard lives. I was hoping that the family would be more like the other side of the family.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you, while kind of keeping this on the down low, as you said, come to find any connection with that Black part of yourself?
I mean, I think I've tried in different ways. It feels though Sometimes I feel like I'm trying things on for size, which I don't know if feels respectful or not, because I'm trying to figure it all out in the most respectful way that I can. So I do kind of think about like where I've come from. I'm always looking, at the genetic updates. Like I did a lot of poking around, try to figure out what I can about the ancestry on that side. About a couple of months ago, my brother and his family were visiting. So we went down to Mount Vernon, which is George Washington's estate, which isn't far from here. It's about half hour, 40 minutes. I made sure to go to the slave cemetery and to pay my respects there. I mean, I always was interested in it, but I think it feels a little bit different because I also know that my biological family, like part of it, were held as slaves in Virginia. And also, I think another thing that really resonated was when I was doing that research and like kind of learning about my family, I found out that, so I'm, biracial, and then my kids are about a quarter African American, something along those lines. And around the time my oldest was applying to college, she loves theater. And we talk about the founding fathers, and like Sally Hemings was a quarter Black. And that particular fact really sat with her because one of my kids like looks totally white, but the other two look like there's some sort of mix going on. And then also for her in particular, like a lot of people assume that she's mixed, I never thought I had real ties to American history or anything like that. And finding out that I have like this deep tie to American history, not to Sally Hemings. I mean, just the fact that I have ancestors that were here in some ways since the 1600s,
Right.
because
So
they were
it's very
brought
different
here.
from like the Ashkenazi Jewish history.
Right. Or my mother that came through Kennedy Airport in 1960 something. And my dad
Right.
that was born in Brooklyn, but his grandparents came from Russia around the turn of the century. It's just a very different history, like that history, like when we went to the Tenement Museum a couple of months ago in New York City, that's that history. And that's the history I grew up with. And almost everyone I grew up with had a history like that, whether they were Jewish or Italian. It was a very similar story of like they came in at that time. And then my mom is, again, a more recent immigrant. But still, I never thought of myself as having these deep American ties. Like I thought we were just like 20th century Americans,
Yeah.
So in that level, I've really connected with that because looking at how like my biological father's maternal family came from slaves in North Carolina and Virginia. His father's family actually came from Bahamas, from the Caribbean. And so they came to the United States more recently from the Caribbean, which is a bit of a different history as well. So there's all these pieces, and I don't know them, but I do feel like a connection to that. And I think because they're just unexpected roots and I'm interested in them, but I don't know how to express them. And I don't know what feels right and what feels right to claim because whatever I do, I feel like an imposter. Like whether it's my Jewish side, because I know that I'm not 100% Jewish, whether it's, the Latin American side, because I know, okay, so my mom is from Latin America and I grew up visiting her country and I have cousins that still live in her country and they have children. So I have all of this family and I do speak the language and I do eat the foods and all of that cultural stuff, but it's still not exactly the same. It's a subset of culture. And then this African American piece that I didn't know anything about and I don't know what I have rights to, especially since I wasn't created on purpose.
You've said that a few times. Like, I'm not supposed to be here. I wasn't created on purpose. Why do you think that comes up so strong for you?
Because I wasn't. Because nobody would have chosen this, right? Like if somebody maybe had an affair or a one night stand or something, even if you were inadvertent, there were decisions that were made that kind of make sense, right? But like for this, there was nothing about my existence that anybody would have done on purpose. No doctor in his right mind would have accidentally created a biracial baby for white parents. And my parents, knowing who they are, especially my mom, she would have adopted a Hispanic baby because she's from Latin America and but she would never have wanted a biracial baby. So it's just hard because my brother was exactly what they wanted. He came out 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. And I always felt he was the favorite. He was kind of like the golden child. And I always felt like I didn't measure up. And I feel like this is kind of part of it because they just wanted a baby. So they were happy to have a baby. But I wasn't what they wanted.
Where have you landed with your parents today?
We don't talk about it.
At all?
Not really, no.
Has your relationship changed?
Yes, especially with my mother. I still am very hurt. I think because she hasn't learned as much as I would have hoped, you know. She's not really racially sensitive. She's still doesn't understand. And it's all about her. Whereas my dad, I think he apologized right away. His apologies were genuine. And I think in a way, I think he would have told me earlier, even though my mom blames him for the whole thing. I think he would have told me earlier because I think he just knew and it was weighing on him. But I think they were both in this lie together. And there was a part of my dad too, I think, that thought that I wouldn't love him if I knew that we weren't related, which isn't the case. Like the reason I'm mad at my mom and we are related is because I felt that she knowingly inflicted pain and caused insecurities and didn't care.
Have you reached a place of self-acceptance with your racial identity and some of those insecurities that you grew up with?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you had this experience, but I think finding out, in a way, like led to more self-acceptance because it made sense. I think making sense kind of makes you like yourself more, whereas constantly trying to explain away things, I think makes you feel more insecure. And I think it felt really good. Like I stopped relaxing my hair. I stopped like worrying so much. I mean, I don't go out in the sun that much anyway now because I don't want to get wrinkled and like it's hot. But it's not the same as when you're 7, right? But like I think I felt more like I made sense because it's really hard. It was weighing on me to not make sense.
What do you say now when people ask you?
Mixed, because I think that probably more captures reality. You know, I'll say I'm mixed. You know, my mom is from Latin America, so I have both of those cultures. But I think saying I'm Black doesn't feel right because I didn't grow up in Black culture. And I feel like Black is not a race, it's an ethnicity. So like that doesn't fit right. But I think mixed fits because it's accurate. Like I'm racially a mixed person. And that is why I'm perceived the way that I am. Culturally, I'm a combination of someone who is of Jewish Latin American culture. And American, obviously. But I think that kind of is where I've landed because that feels the most authentic. I mentioned I had Googled like African American or Jewish people that look African American, and I'd found like Lisa Bonet and I'd found Lenny Kravitz. Well, I saw an article in the New York Times a couple of years ago, it must have been about 8 or 9 years ago, about Lacey Schwartz. And she had this documentary called Little White Lie that was I saw it on Amazon and I read the article and I forgot all about this, but I immediately wrote to her and I didn't know any of the story. This was before the DNA test, anything. And I wrote to her and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm not Black, but so much of your story resonates. And I've always wondered, but it just kind of goes to show like I'd been really trying for a very long time to understand the story. And that story resonated with me. And it must have been almost 10 years ago at this point, like well before any of this. And I still like when I found out, like, you know, and I told you I had I knew that my mom was hiding something. I tried tests, like I had bought a test and it disappeared, like all of this stuff. But then when I found out, like I felt like the dumbest person alive, like so dumb. And like people tell you you're dumb too. I don't know if they do it to you, but they tell me like, are you dumb? Like, how did you not know? And I'm like, I just didn't. Like, I knew and I didn't. Like, I think that's probably the most accurate answer. Like, it's not that I didn't know. It's that I didn't know. You know, well, like I knew.
Yeah, it's just what you said, though. You believe what your parents tell you. I mean, I feel like I probably didn't get as much of the are you dumb because my dad is Mexican and he's dark. Why would you say, no, I don't believe you? Why would you confront your mom and be like, did you have an affair? Like, I mean, that's a bold thing to do, especially as a child.
Right. And your origin story is fundamental to who you are. And like also when you're Jewish, like your ethnic identity is such a huge part of who you are. And also there's a huge part of being Jewish that really focuses on like the matrilineal line and like all of that. And like, it's like the fundamental thing, like you meet someone and the first thing is, are you Jewish? Like it's the first thing that they ask. So it's so fundamental. So for me to like even question that, and also my mom was very conservative and like to question her integrity, like it took me like over 40 years to develop the guts to even like mail in a DNA test because I was so scared. Like, I didn't know what I was going to find. By the time I mailed it in, I knew there was something going on. But even then, like, there was still so much denial going on. I literally ordered a 23andMe right after. I was in acceptance a little bit before the 23andMe results came. I called my brother and he was like, well, that's got to be correct, you know? And by the way, my parents didn't tell him he was donor conceived. I did. They never told
they
him.
didn't.
They never discussed
And
it.
how did he take it?
Well, I think by then he was staying up to date with the saga. And then he was just like, well, I was like, it's possible because you're short and you kind of resemble them. I'm like, it's possible that the sperm mixing micro magic, whatever they told my parents worked. I don't know. And it did not. I know he found like a half sibling. We haven't really talked about it. I think it affected me more deeply than it did him. I think, first of all, he's a guy. And I think for whatever reason, I think men don't react the same way. And secondly, I think he looked the part. So I don't think he had like a lifetime of unanswered questions in the way that I did.
I'm interested in your perspective here because we had similar discoveries, but in different ways, right? Do you have any grief about the fact that you didn't know earlier and therefore aren't really able to connect with that half of yourself?
100%. I think my experience, and yours too, in a lot of ways, it's similar to like the transracial adoptee experience, right? Because they grow up, they're brought here from the United States and they grow up. And like when I was a kid, people didn't really bother to teach them their culture. And I've heard a lot of stories where people would say, you know, like they outwardly look to be like Asian or whatever the race is, but they don't know anything and have any connection to that culture. Like it was just kind of cut off because the parents never bothered to teach them about it. And there's a family in our neighborhood. Some of the kids went to school with my kids, and both of the kids were adopted from Ethiopia by like white South Asian parents. So not African parents. And the parents like had the kids go to these Ethiopian groups. Like they fed them Ethiopian food. And then they actually took the kids back to Ethiopia and reconnected them with their biological family. You know, and I thought it was amazing. But then also, in a sense, it's like, wow, like, because they never, I mean, maybe they do in some level, but on the other hand, they were raised to know who they were and where they came from. And there wasn't this expectation that their identity become subsumed by their parents' identity. Because when you're not the same as your parents, like, there's a whole half of your identity that matters. And I feel that I lost the ability to learn how to move and navigate in the African American community in an authentic way because in a lot of ways I was just taught to navigate in a very different world. And then there were times when like there was a mismatch, like when it was really obvious that I wasn't being perceived, you know, as a white person when I'd have to try to figure it out by myself. And I wish I had the chance to like get to know more, like eat African American foods and understand Black culture better and grow up among Black people. Like I grew up in a 100% white neighborhood. There was literally nobody like me. And I wish I had that because it's not my fault.
No, it's not your fault at all, but you are left to navigate it, right?
You are, and which is tricky because I think there are certain things that, you know, parents have, conversations that people have with their kids, like that are unique and specific to a culture. And there's just, I think there's a certain vocabulary or language, or I don't know what the right word is, but like a way of navigating the world that's tied to a culture. And there are just certain things that you intrinsically understand when you grow up in a culture. And when you didn't, it's harder because people think you should know that language, but you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. What advice do you have for parents who are hiding a DNA surprise from their child?
Stop. Like, don't do it because it's not your information. It's your child's information. And your own personal fears and insecurities are not your child's issue. I think, especially in the donor conceived world, and I know this happens, I think in general, but I think at the time I was created, I can only really speak to that because that's what I've learned from my parents. I think there was so much deep shame in it. And this idea that nurture matters more than nature, or you can kind of design a baby to your image, but that's not the way humans are. And I didn't sign up for that. Like, I didn't agree to be created by a donor. And just the fact that one of my biological parents is a donor doesn't mean that that genetic and identity is any less important than the genetic identity of the parent who raised me. So I think parents should think about that, because even if you don't value it, your child does.
What advice do you have for someone who just uncovered a DNA surprise, maybe one similar to your own?
Still working through it, but it's been 4 years. I think maybe grace, like your parents messed up, and I think it's reasonable to be mad and it's reasonable to be angry. But I think what helped me move forward in a lot of ways was trying to understand like what my parents' mindset was at that time and why they acted the way they did, even if I think there are a million things they should have done differently. And I would never have done, I like to think I would never have done what they did. They were also operating within a certain culture. They were told by their doctors that they didn't need to tell anyone. They believed certain things about secrecy. And there was a time when people didn't tell their kids they were adopted either. And that was considered okay. And it's wrong. And we know that now. And I think sometimes you have to be compassionate. But at the same time, I think it's also fair to expect an apology and to expect them to learn. And if they don't figure out a way to navigate it, ultimately it's up to you. Like for me, I'm not the type of person that could ever go no contact with my mom, even though she hasn't done what I would have liked her to do or responded the way I would have liked her to do. I just know that's who she is. And even though she didn't accept me in the ways I would have hoped, I just decided, at least for me, that I can have a relationship with her on my terms, because I value that. And she knows I'm still hurt, but that doesn't make it okay. Just don't feel that there's one particular way to handle it or one particular response you have to have. It's perfectly okay for your parents to disappoint you and to also decide not to go no contact if that's what works for you. But it's really individual how you want to handle your parents.
Lori, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. I know it resonated deeply for me, and I'm sure it's going to resonate deeply for others who are listening. And I just wish you the best as you kind of figure all of this out. Thanks you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Lori for sharing her story. And thank you to all of the guests who trusted me with your stories this season. If you have a DNA surprise that you'd like to share, please submit your story at dnasurprises.com. If you'd like to support the show, please rate and review the podcast on Apple and Spotify. It really helps. You can also join me over on Patreon for early ad-free access to episodes. We're taking a short break for the summer, but we'll be back soon with new DNA surprise stories. Thank you for listening. Until next time. This episode of DNA Surprises was hosted, produced, and edited by me, Alexis Auerselt. It was mixed and mastered by Josh Auerselt of Siren Recording Studios.